Well, howdy, and welcome to our July Answers for You presentation. Today, our presentation is going to be how do you do faculty onboarding at Texas A&M? And we're going to discuss faculty onboarding in general, and then we're going to present some various items that need to be considered and what steps to take for onboarding new faculty, especially those that might be having sponsored research that they're needing to transfer the project into Texas A&M. Well, I'm very pleased today to have my co-presenter. Probably he's going to do the bulk of the presentation, Ron Carter, a longtime friend and longtime employee here at Texas A&M. He's the assistant department head with the Texas A&M Chemistry Department. And then I'm David Hollingsworth, the Director of Professional Development and Outreach Initiatives here at SRS. We're going to talk about communication. And before we kind of get into some of this, I'm going to ask Ron just maybe to briefly go over sort of what the hiring process is for faculty and the timing of it. You know, when do these decisions occur and when do they know who's going to be coming on? So welcome, Ron. Go ahead and just lead off on this.
Good morning, David and everyone. The timing on this topic is really on target here. Right now, we have three inbound faculty coming in, one from the West Coast, one from the East Coast, and one from Europe, and they're all expected to be here next Thursday, Friday, as their employment period begins. But to get to this point here, basically, we start back in the early fall, and the department and the faculty come together and assess the need of hiring faculty. We may have had faculty who have departed, some who have left the university or they're not going to do research anymore. And so the faculty as a whole come together to look and see if we need, more junior faculty or senior faculty in those particular divisions. We have like 5 or 6 divisions here with organic, inorganic, analytical, physical chemistry, biological chemistry. So the faculty come to a whole to see, what colleague that we need to bring on board into our department that would complement the other faculty and other research that's ongoing. And so once the committee comes together and decides that they, say for instance, they need 3 junior faculty, one in organic or inorganic or a theoretical chemist, then that's given to the department head. He participates in these discussions. And so once they kind of narrowed that down, then of course, then he has to deal with the administration, the dean or the provost, and the funding that would be available to hire new faculty. Now, in chemistry, I can only speak for chemistry. It's more than just having an office and a computer. We're talking about, big laboratories. We're talking about instrumentation that has to be purchased. And so the dollar value on these faculty packages are quite high just because of the value of the instruments that are being purchased. So once that negotiation has been addressed or approved by the dean that the money will be available to go out and make these recruits, then that process begins. And the recruitment begins by soliciting advertisements through, electronic media or through national journals and nationwide. And that period is open for a couple of weeks. And once those resumes are brought into the department, then looked at, then they're determined on which faculty member that candidate's looking at we want to bring into the department and to have them present a seminar and kind of visit with us in the early spring. So for the latter part of the fall term is really the recruitment of really gathering those candidates' names and going through the committee and sifting those things out. And then in early spring, starting in January, February are the 2 months that we prefer, is bring these individuals in to give a seminar on their topics and talk with the faculty and maybe visit around the department and get to kind of know what's kind of going on here. After those seminars are presented at that point, then the committee takes those resumes and everybody is graded on their work or their presentation and just the whole visit that was here. And then the finalists are then selected and that information is given back to the department head. And then the department head then reschedules a second visit. And those are your finalists that you want to look at and kind of gather a little bit deeper into their work and vice versa. So then they will come in here, excuse me, they'll come in here and then they will, again, give another seminar. They'll visit, the dean's office. They'll visit with the grad students, other faculty, the VPR, certainly myself, and, other individuals that are of interest to the candidate who like to know get a sense and feel of what the university operations is all about. So if the candidate finishes all of his visits, his final visit is basically with the dean, with the department head, and they begin to work on the details of what it was going to take for that candidate to accept a position here at Texas A&M. And that would include not only his salary, but his teaching assignments, the space he needs, his graduate student supports, and those various things that would be important for him to move and come to Texas A&M. So if he's successful with that, and he agrees to come on board and he signs his acceptance letter, then that comes through the department head and then through the dean to sign off on it. Then we begin the arrival process. And first thing that we do, usually the letter is handed off to me, and I will I will call that candidate and congratulate him coming to Texas A&M. And then some of the first questions we're going to ask is like, when do you plan to arrive? And certainly the second question is, or do you have federal grants or any grants that are coming to Texas A&M? And so if the answer, certainly he wants to arrive here, he or she wants to arrive here by August the 1st. And the reason why that is, that's when our new class of graduate students begin to arrive and we start onboarding them in and preparing them to come and start their PhD programs. We only have a PhD program here. And so our class this year is very large. We have 83 grad students coming in, and they're starting to trickle in as we speak. But they want to be here to interview those grad students so that they can have some grad students start working in their programs from that point. So, but back to the most important thing again is this: do you have federal grants and contracts? And so if they're usually just a postdoc that's been out has had his degree for just a couple of years, odds are he really doesn't have a major grant. But if you go with a senior faculty member inbound, then that becomes a different story, a different process that you have to work on. The first thing I do is talk to them and then have him or her, I want to contact my equivalent at their institution and talk to them and then get their, quote, Texas A&M's SRS person to talk to our Texas A&M SR person. So either Shelley or Charlotte, whoever is over here, they need to start that communications on getting those grants coming this way. You want to speak anything about that, David, before we move on?
Well, yes, I'll just mention, I think whether they have a grant, existing projects or not, it's always good to, if you can, to put them in touch with SRS and notify SRS. Oh, I've got 3 new faculty members that are coming in and they, will be doing research. That just kind of gives our proposal people especially a heads up. Yeah, I think it's helpful if the department will either give us the contact information for the new faculty member or go ahead and sort of facilitate a meeting between SRS and the new faculty member virtually, or, if they're going to be on campus in person or at least via a phone call, just so that we can go over the process. Even if they don't have any existing awards, we know that once they're coming on board, or maybe even before they get here, they're going to need to start working with SRS and hopefully submitting some proposals and getting some funding. And so that way we can just kind of go over the process with them. We have various resources on our website, like a PI guidebook and some other videos, but it's always just nice to have that meet, either again, virtually or in person, and just to kind of go through and what are the services that SRS will offer for that faculty member. So I think those are kind of the important things I wanted to talk about as far as just meeting with the faculty member early on and knowing that who's coming in so we can kind of plan for that. Let's talk about preparation. And Ron, you can just talk about some of the different aspects and the things that you go through in preparing for like a new faculty member to arrive and making sure that they have what they need and making sure that they sort of feel welcome. You had mentioned that's a very important part that you want, you don't want them to be stressing about different things here. You want to kind of let them know that you're taking care of these things for them.
Yes. So in their last visit, we had walked around with the candidate to look at the lab space and everything else. And so during the time that before his arrival, we will send him, some blueprints and let him doodle how he wants the lab to be rearranged, or additional things, infrastructure put in there. Our biggest interest that we want to is really what kind of equipment is he going to be buying. If he's buying some big super instruments that cost several $100,000, then what is that piece of equipment going to require? It's going to need high pressure nitrogen. It's going to need chilled water, compressed air, high voltage that it's going to run the instrument. So those things, getting that kind of information off of those instruments is instrumental in that as we begin to develop and renovate the lab to accommodate the candidates, the new faculty's wishes to when he gets here. So our true goal is to try to have much of this preparation done before his arrival. But sometimes you get into like COVID, or you get hurricanes coming through. Right now we got some delays from Hurricane Pearl down in Houston because some of the manufacturing plants that we had down there were off power. So we're a little behind here just on those kind of things. So Mother Nature does kind of take place of that. But or you have a container coming from Europe or Japan and stuck in Savannah, Georgia, or New Jersey or somewhere. Those are things you just have to work around. But the main thing is getting that there, and then having him or her go out and get these high-end instrumentation and talk to those vendors, and then work out the quote that they're going to need that has all of the specific dimensions that's required for them to do their work. A lot of that's done because where they went to school at and their institution, they become very familiar with a specific type of equipment. And so they're kind of really used to that operation that's there, but it doesn't mean that they're going to just be using that's the only one they're going to use, but they will look at the market that's out there and begin to build those quotations over a course of a couple of weeks. The reason for that on the new purchase is these things are not on the shelf items. They have to be custom made. And some of them are made in Switzerland and Germany, overseas. Some are made here in the USA, but it still takes a lot of time to make to make these things. So once they kind of get here, then we try to work with them to get over to purchasing and work with purchasing to get a purchase order out there so that time can start, especially on these big orders or these equipment that's 6, 7, 8 months out. So if you can start on that early, hopefully, you'll have that equipment here by November, December, or January. And that's very important to them because, their clock starts for their tenures, when their boots hit the ground here. So getting as much time in the laboratory for them to begin doing their research and recruiting their students and getting their research associates going, that begins their program here as far as doing their work here within the department. Now, also, if you have a senior faculty, you'll back up and go the other way. If you have a senior faculty that's inbound and he has grants and contracts, which we kind of mentioned earlier, our first initiative is get a hold of SRS and let his other institution talk with them and start that process of transferring those federal grants to Texas A&M. This is a time-consuming process. This is not going to happen in a day or two or a week or a month. It's going to take 90 to 120 or plus days to make those federal grant transfers from that institution to Texas A&M. There's a lot of business at the other institution. They have to close the expenses and vice versa. You have to go to the funding agency to make sure you have that approval. And then over here, you begin to open up all the windows and everything to receive that grant here at Texas A&M. If that faculty member also has accumulated over the course of his tenure at the other institution some very high-end special made instruments that he wants to bring to Texas A&M, then we will talk to the institution and tell them to provide us a document with the purchase date, the name of the item, the purchase price, and then give us the depreciation or the negotiated price that they feel is relevant for them to sell that piece of equipment to Texas A&M. It's really a win-win for both parties because one, these items are so highly sophisticated and with a long lead time to manufacture. So if the university works with the other institution and we can buy it from them, it cuts down not only on the delivery time, but the faculty member already has equipment that he can, when it's delivered here, can move into his laboratory and his research can continue. So you move those projects from one institution to the other and continue with that research that's kind of going on. So that is an ongoing thing that's going there too. So as he or she arrives here, then he's beginning to look at the minor pieces of equipment. You know, there's always at purchasing. We try to push them to the punch outs at purchasing with VWR, Fisher, any of those names that are on there, because then it cuts down on the delivery time, because those are automatic POs that are generated to them. And then we try to get those vendors to work with the new faculty to get exactly the kind of minor instruments, and then the chemicals and various things that he's going to require. So also involved with that is that you have to have the labs have to be commissioned with environmental health and safety, so they know that you now are reoccupying a laboratory and the kind of work you're doing and what kind of chemicals that you're going to have in there for their documentation that they have to have there. Also, if the new faculty, the senior faculty is coming down here and he has grad students who say 2 or 3 want to stay, and they're in their 5th year at, say, Maryland or whatever else, they want to stay there and graduate from Maryland. And you have, 6 or 7 who want to come with a faculty member to Texas A&M. Maybe they're on their 1st or 2nd year in their studies and everything else, and they're just going to move with the faculty member. It's very important on that is, one, on the federal grant process, you have to figure out between the 2 institutions who is going to stay behind and money set aside to finish paying the kids that stay behind. And then the new students inbound here must get their paperwork and documentation in order to move from that other institution to Texas A&M University. In that, if you have some international students, then I just got one more complicated thing you have to work with the international services here, checking on their visas, the type of visas they have, so that when they move down here, those documentations on the dates of departure at their other institution and arriving at Texas A&M are all in sequence in the way in which they need to be done. If they have a research scientist, that's even more important than starting these process, more important, because he was hired to do the work, say, on an NSF project or a DOD project. And when he moves down here, his paperwork has to move with the project, so he can keep the continuity of the research going with the existing students he has here, but he's also recruiting some of the new students that are arriving here in August. So that's a really, really important thing to process, to stay on top of it. I guess working with the personnel who are moving from the institution to Texas A&M is critical to keep up with them. They don't get lost in the cracks, because you really could jeopardize, if they're an international student, you could jeopardize their visa or whatever else, and would have to leave the country again. And that's the last thing that Texas A&M doesn't want to do. So those are really important things that you have to look at. But back to the equipment, once you have that documentation from the institution that this is what an agreed price is on, and the faculty agrees upon that, and I usually let the department head look at that, and everything seems to be okay, and kind of look at the prices that there, because a lot of this equipment we have here in the department. And so I can look at the values to see they're comparable, and sometimes I may call Dorothy over at property management and ask her, run this number through there and see what our equivalent instrument is to that one, and see if it's within the framework and being proper charge and everything. But once that's issued, the faculty member or the institution really doesn't want to release that equipment unless they had a bona fide document in hand. So purchasing is pretty good about that. We have to do a lot of paper writing and documentation to get to them, so that they can issue that to the other institution so that they will release it. The supplies, we prefer not to bring the chemicals. That is a major issue, having to bring these very highly hazardous chemicals across state lines. Every state has a different kind of permit. So we really, really encourage the faculty member to leave those chemicals behind and give them to his colleagues that they're at his institution, because that can be a very, very, very expensive thing if you want to bring chemicals with you. And I'm talking like you have a couple of bottles, a couple of gallons, vice versa, depending on the permits and the state lines you cross, that could cost you anywhere between $30,000 and $50,000. The chemicals are not worth that amount of money. So leave them behind and start new, fresh here when you arrive here at Texas A&M. So that's really something that's important to watch that piece also. So we talked about, the laboratory as we're continuing to build the laboratory to accept the instrumentation that's coming in here. Then when he arrives here, certainly we want to make sure we can't do really much until his boots hit the Texas soil, but we want to, a lot of these faculty have their moving allowance. And that's not cannot be activated until they're here on the university, and then we get them over to Workday so that they're responsible for moving from their institution to Texas A&M. Texas A&M no longer does the contracting or anything with a moving company to do that. It solely belongs to the faculty member to get his stuff here, and he would have gone and gotten quotations for his research stuff that were coming down here, or his home stuff that was taking place. And so he will have that number. That's what's important in his negotiation of his acceptance letter, how and what that's going to contain to make sure that everything is in a proper category for that. So when he isn't, that's one of the things that take place. And of course, then when he gets here, we start making sure, getting him on board into the different platforms, into AggieBuy, of course, getting introduced over to SRS, and then Concur and those things. Those take time to get those up there because we want him to become as active as he can as soon as the process goes through the system and it allows him to have that. And then that gives you the internet access and building access and keys and Workday and all those kind of the platforms that we have to use here to do our day-to-day business.
All right, Ron, well, thank you for covering that. Now we're going to just talk a little bit about submitting proposals prior to arrival. If they have a signed offer letter, of course, one of the things that we want to look at is their start date and then also the amount of the salary that they're going to be paid. Right. When you're submitting a proposal, especially like to a federal agency, a National Science Foundation or National Institutes of Health, from the time that you actually submit the proposal and it goes through their review process until they're finally making an award, that can be from like 9 to 12 months. Mm-hmm. And so even if he knows like 6 months ahead of time he's going to be coming to Texas A&M in August, it doesn't really make sense for him to continue submitting proposals at his current institution, because by the time they're awarded, he'll be here at Texas A&M and there'll be a process of trying to transfer that grant and do things like that. So one of the things SRS and the departments and the university allows is that once we have that offer letter, the faculty member can go ahead and submit proposals through Texas A&M. Now, keep in mind, if they're in AgriLife, then they're going to be submitting their proposals through AgriLife. If they're in the College of Agriculture and Life Sciences, or if they're in the College of Engineering, then they're going to be submitting theirs to the Texas A&M Engineering Experiment Station, or known as TEAS. And sometimes we have to have that conversation's a little confusing to the new faculty member, because he'll say, well, my offer letter says Texas A&M. How come, I'm not going to submit that in the name of Texas A&M if I'm in engineering or whatever? But we'll explain that kind of dual appointment role to him. And sometimes maybe if he'll want to talk to his department head to get the assurance that is the way that he's supposed to be submitting his proposals. Maestro, we can go ahead and the Maestro can give them access even before they're here. And so they can be set up in Maestro, and then that way when they're submitting the proposal, they're submitting it in their own name if they're already submitted in Maestro. Sometimes if they're not and we need to submit a proposal, we will check with the department head and maybe put him as a placeholder in Maestro. But of course, what goes to the sponsor will be the faculty member's name on there. Also, setting them up in the various sponsor portals, like NSF has their research.gov or NIH eCommons. And so if they're already in there from their previous institution, they'll need to work with their SRS proposal administrator. Some of these portals, it's the PI has to initiate and make the change and then affiliate with Texas A&M or affiliate with TEAS or whichever group he's going to be with. That is important to go ahead and get changed over. many of those type of portals will allow you to have multiple affiliations. So they can be affiliated with Texas A&M. Sometimes their proposals might go through Texas A&M, and they can also be affiliated with TEAS, which would be, if they're in engineering, the normal process or normal way for them to submit their proposals. Anyway, again, it's just important to make that connection with their SRS proposal administrator so that we can start working with them early on. And like you said, the clock for tenure starts ticking. And if they've already got some proposals submitted, then hopefully maybe a few months after they're here, they'll have some good news and they'll have an award coming in. You have anything to say on that, Ron?
No, I think that really is really important is to get that faculty member down here and get those portals open for him. And you really just can't emphasize that, because they wait a couple of months and whatever else, come into September, the new fiscal year starts, the federal government starts on October the 1st, and you change administrations and the government, things get bogged down something. So really, you really need to, like David's saying, is you really need to keep kind of pushing them through there if they're in these going to the big granting agencies to make sure that they're there, because it is a tedious process. And so that's why we try to get them here. We give them a waiver for the first semester here, a non-teaching, because our whole purpose is submitting proposals. And so by the end of the semester, the fall term, they should have submitted several proposals to various agencies, and to try to get those into the system, and hopefully, knock on wood, they could be notified late spring, early fall, early summer, that they're a candidate to have a major proposal funded. So it takes about a year to do the cycle, to all the sifting and all the reviews that have to go with the proposal. So during that time, he's building his labs and he has a good idea of what is going on. So it's always tremendous news when he gets hooked on to a big major funding grant.
Just talking about some additional considerations. Of course, their financial compliance. All the faculty members fill out their conflict of interest disclosure and do their training. And typically must submit that within 30 days of their initial employment date. They're going to get a notification from Huron about completing their disclosure. And then they'll get a notification from Train Track to do their COI training. So those are things to just sort of make sure that they are doing and get that done in a timely manner. Research compliance. We've experienced this in the past where maybe a faculty member is transferring in, and either they do work in the various compliance areas, like what we're talking about is maybe their research involves human subjects, or it involves research with animals or recombinant DNA. And, they may, just not be aware of needing to take care of those protocols. They say, oh, I've got the protocol at my existing institution, and start the process of getting their grant transferred, but not really reach out to these various compliance offices to get submit their protocol and get that approved here at Texas A&M. And that can be a real holdup if they're not working on that. So part of talking to them in that initial conversation, if they're going to be transferring some stuff, is to find out, do you do research with human subjects or with recombinant DNA or animals? Let me put you in touch with the proper office so that you can kind of already go through and look on their website and find out what the process is about submitting those protocols so they'll be approved in a timely manner. I also just mentioned intellectual property. Sometimes that they may have some intellectual property that they have developed at their maybe previous institution. And that can be a little complicated on how that's going to be, transferred, or what rights he would still have in it. So what I say there is talk about go to the Texas A&M Innovation, Texas A&M System Innovation Office, and discuss that with them, and they can work with that previous institution and with the faculty member and getting all those type of things ironed out again ahead of time. Other things that they might have, maybe a material transfer agreement. Perhaps they got some in their research, they've got some biological specimens from some source at their other institution, and to get that and to use that, they had to have a material transfer agreement. Well, that's not going to still be in effect when they move to the new institution. So, and many times those agreements may have wording in there that doesn't allow them to bring those specimens with them. So they're going to need to do a new transfer agreement, work with SRS for non-financial type of contracts and get that in place. Same thing with data use. They may have agreement to use data from some repository or source, and they'll need to have that updated with Texas A&M or TEAS or AgriLife, whichever one it might be. Collaboration agreements. Maybe they've got other institutions that they've been collaborating with, maybe non-financially, but sharing data or something like that. And so those would need to be updated as well. Anything that you run into on that?
David, the IP and the MTAs are really very complicated and very complex, and sometimes it's legal offices are involved with that because these things are usually signed off with the other institution, and so that really becomes something between the two institutions and those two offices there, if they're going to allow the transfer to happen or it retains at the other institution. And that is really something that if the faculty member inbound has those, he has to really pay attention to that, because I agree, once it leaves the other institution, it's not valid here at Texas A&M. And so that has to be on board, or transferring of those type of documents have to be inbound. If you have a third party that's involved with that, you're going to have to bring that into that, be involved with that too, to make sure they're okay with that, or, their legal people are okay. So those are two really complex items there that may take a little lot longer than you think, and than just sign up one document and sign another one, because there are, trademarks and registration things that are involved with that sometimes. And so some parties don't want to give it up. I mean, in most cases, they understand, but they're going to have to rewrite it. And sometimes the other institution becomes a sub-partner of the new MTA or the IPs because they were there when it evolved, and they still want to have some credit with it if it, as it moves through evolution of their work.
Let's go and talk about some of the options when they do have an existing sponsored project at their institution. We'll just kind of go through some of these. One, it could be that their existing institution decides just to retain the project. Maybe this person's maybe he's not the lead PI, or maybe it's more of an institutional type of award. And so they may decide, which is their decision, just to keep the project there and name a new PI there to continue the project. It could also be retained by the original institution. They might name a new PI, but let's say our person was a co-PI on it, and then they're going to maybe turn around and subcontract a portion of what he was doing now to Texas A&M. So they would be working with SRS. Typically, in that case, they're going to want to have a proposal submitted to them with the amount that they've decided that he would have to spend on his part of the project. And then it would get involved with our contracts group, working with them as they would issue a subcontract to our institution here. In some cases, maybe they're toward the end of the project, maybe much of the money has already been spent or the work has been done. And it may be more beneficial and easy to just go ahead and terminate the project. And so either the sponsor or the institution, the existing institution, might just say, okay, we only had a month or so left on this. Everything, he submitted his final report. It's really not worth all the effort and the expense, really, to try to transfer $1,000 or whatever might be left. Let's just go ahead and terminate the project. Then the other one is the project can be relinquished by the original institution, and the sponsor will transfer that to the new institution. I think what's important on really all these scenarios that we're going through is that the faculty member talk to his program manager at whatever sponsor, NSF, NIH, wherever it might be, and kind of find out from him what is, because the sponsor is really kind of going to be the one calling the shots.
Mm-hmm.
Some sponsors, it's like, yes, you move to your new institution. We've got a process in place. We'll work with your old institution and get them to relinquish it, and we'll transfer it. Other sponsors are, no, we want to keep it with the original institution, especially maybe if it's a contract as opposed to a grant. And it's a lot of work to get a contract in place. And they may say, we're going to keep it with that, and then we'll have them turn around and subcontract to you. So it really needs to talk to their program manager, and then sort of follow the guidance that he's going to be giving in, and also working with his original institution, because as we know, the award is made to the institution, not directly to the PI. And so the institution really has to be the one that decides, are they going to relinquish that and let it go to the new institution? Now, I will say, in my experience, generally, if it's a NSF, NIH type of grant, and this person is the faculty member was like the lead person on it, the sponsor and the existing institution are going to be open to going ahead and transferring that. We have people here that have grants and they're moving on to a different institution, and we're going to generally do the same thing, be willing to transfer it. Another one is basically what we just talked about. They're going to relinquish it and transfer it to us, but they still have, maybe like you mentioned, grad students that are still going to retain at the original institution. And so they may need to name a faculty member as a PI at that institution, and there's got to be a way to get some money back to them. And so that would be a case where we get the award, and then we're going to turn around and issue a subcontract back to his original institution to pay those graduate students as they finish up on the project. And all of this, as you mentioned, it can take a long time. And that is because the spending at the original institution has to stop on the project if they're going to transfer it. And they have to actually do a relinquishing statement back to the sponsor, which has that amount that they kind of their total expenditures that they spent, and then also how much money is left to be transferred to the new institution. And so that's, it probably takes at least, once they stop spending, about 30 days for their expenses to hit and get processed. It's going to take another month or so for the sponsor, maybe longer, to issue the new documents, request the proposal. We'll have to work up a proposal for the money that's left with our rates. So the new rate of the faculty member, the rates that we're supporting the graduate students on, our fringe rates, tuition rates, basically just like we're submitting a brand new proposal to the sponsor. And so we'll submit that, and then again, take some time for them to process that and get the award. So it can take, I would say, easily, 3 to 4 to sometimes even 6 months. You run into some issues. Maybe that the original project had cost sharing on it. And so now we're going to be expected to cost share on the part that's coming to us, and to get all that lined up and find sources for the cost share and things like that can be an issue. The last bullet on there about subrecipients. So if they had subrecipients on the original project, again, they've got to terminate those subrecipients, the original institution, and stop the spending for them. And then when the project is transferred and set up here, then if he still is wanting to use those same subrecipients, and he'll have to tell us the amount that he wants to forward to those, depending on the way the project's going, then we would be issuing subcontracts to those subrecipients to get them on board. So it is can be a very timely process, and I think it's good to, of course, you want to start early and then give the faculty members some realistic expectations, so that he's not thinking, oh, well, I'm going to be able to start up here next month with the spending on this, and then be a little bit disappointed when that doesn't happen.
The only thing which you emphasize is you got to start early. That's the reason why we try to have our faculty acceptance in March, April. And if they do have those federal grants, then our whole goal is to try to have them transfer to Texas A&M prior to the new federal calendar starting on October the 1st. And some go quick, some are tedious, and some take a long time. So, and you're right, David, you really have to be realistic with the faculty member coming down here. Just because he arrives here in August, the money may not be available for another 90 days. So let him understand when he hits the ground here, those funds may not be ready for him to use. He'll have to use other institutional funds that he's got here when he gets here to Texas A&M.
Well, that brings us kind of to our basically final slide, just the takeaways. I think the first bullet you just talked about, communication is key to successful onboarding and early communication. Again, meeting with SRS to kind of go over the overall processes, because they might be different from whatever institution that the faculty member was at before, if he was somewhere, or if he's brand new. He may not really have, as a grad student or a postdoc, he may not have really known the whole process and what it takes to put a proposal together and submit that. And then the transfer process. So, and letting them know that that's going to take time.
David, one more thing, and just that when you have these young faculty that are just getting started in their careers, one of the things also available to them, NSF, NIH, DOD do have big workshops in DC that these young faculty can go up there, and they're very, very good, very hands-on with those project administrators up there to show these new faculty how to submit proposals, how it's involved, and grasp the whole process together, so that when they come back here to Texas A&M, then they understand a little bit more of the process. So if you had a faculty member or junior faculty came in here and he did to the NSF program and went to DC, and then he now has a successful NSF grant, he now wants to apply DOD. Well, DOD also has a workshop up there during the summer, then we'll send him back up there too. So you want to give the faculty all the tools they possibly can to generate these big research grants and everything. It's fundamentally important to their careers, but also to Texas A&M.
But hopefully this will give you some ideas to think about on onboarding your faculty. Now, we know that this doesn't apply to every department. We have some departments that, they're not needing a big lab. All they need to do their research is their laptop computer and a desk in an office. And so some of these things may not apply for your particular situation in your department or your college, but hopefully it will. Some of these items, as far as just talking about transferring the research projects and things, would apply to all of you.